Danny, why do you think the Rockets are going to beat the Warriors?
Buddy, I got 2 words for you. Daniel House.
Welcome to Dethroning the Warriors, a multi-part series where we get into the big question over these NBA playoffs. Who can take down the Golden State Warriors? That's Danny Chau. I'm Justin Verrier. Apparently he's not going to say my name. That's fine.
I was too busy shouting out my mom.
We're going to start where else with the Houston Rockets, the team that pushed them to 7 games last year. First off, we're going to get into how this team is built, and then Danny's going to take us through a little bit of James Harden's specific evolution. Pretty much Daryl Morey is a thirsty boy here.
Yeah.
And he's pretty much said as much last season.
Yeah, so here's a quote that he had in December of 2017 on the Ryan Russillo show. Dear colleague, it's the only thing we think about. I think I'm not supposed to say that, but we're basically obsessed with how do we beat the Warriors. Perfect setup for our show.
He's spent the past few years really obsessed over building this team into the exact team to kind of take down the Warriors. Obviously, it started with James Harden, the trade that pretty much founded Grantland, essentially. That's really what most of it was about. And then from there, things kind of snowballed. They picked off Clint Capella with pick number 25 in the 2014 draft. Chris Paul came in 2017. He basically said he wanted to go to Houston, and so the Clippers had to ship him off. They got pretty much every other player on the Rockets roster, some of whom have actually done pretty well in Los Angeles.
Montrezl Harrell, Lou Williams. Pretty good.
So around these 3 stars that they've been able to acquire, they've really filled them out with a gaggle of wing players. Eric Gordon, they overpaid just a little bit, and Ryan Anderson from New Orleans basically took the guts of that team, put him around James Harden to put some 3-point shooters there. PJ Tucker took less money than from what he was going to get in Toronto. In order to kind of join what they had there. And then they've worked the scrap heap really effectively. In the midst of this season, Daniel House came. Austin Rivers picked off a waiver wire.
Wizards legends, both of them.
Amon Shumpert also came in and the tax dump for Brandon Knight's contract. But in the midst of all this happening, James Harden has also really evolved here. Danny, how is he kind of like taking his game from where he was when they got him to where he is now?
Yeah, when they got him, he was this Manu Ginobili acolyte. He was a guy who came off the bench, guy who was super efficient in everything he did. 49% shooting from the field, 39% from the 3. And now he's in the past, 7 years he's been on the Rockets. He's transformed himself into the most devastating scorer in NBA history.
Right.
I think we could safely say that. I feel like the best way to describe him is just, he has kind of taken Steph Curry's torch and taken it to a different kind of weirder level.
Yeah, it's almost like they perverted this beautiful style that the Warriors have played.
Yeah, so Steph...
In a good way. I mean, it's very effective. Maybe not aesthetically pleasing. But.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's pretty much it. So Steph broke the sound barrier in terms of 3-point shooting. In 2015-16, he averaged 11 attempts per game, which no one had ever done that before. And Harden has spent so much of the past 2 or 3 years trying to catch up to that. He finally got to 10 attempts last year. This year, completely different animal. They've needed so much from him. He's actually averaging more 3s per game than Steph ever has in his career. So he's at 13.4 attempts this season, which is just absolutely absurd.
Yeah, and you look at some of the isolation frequencies you see on NBA stats, and it's a couple Rockets players are 3 and 2. I think it's Rivers, Paul, and then Harden all the way up there. He's at 40% of his plays, essentially, and a lot of those are just step back 3-pointers.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, we talk about Harden's evolution on offense, but it's really kind of his evolution on defense that has made Houston more of a well-rounded team. And so when we're talking about what he does on defense, for the most part, over the past 7 years, it's been, oh, look at this guy, he doesn't know where he's going. Oh, look at this guy, he's on a meme. Oh, look at this guy, he's on another meme. But now, he's in this switch-heavy scheme that allows him to basically be the defender that he's always been capable of being.
He's a thick boy.
He's a thick boy, 6'5", 6'11" wingspan, 220, 230, who knows how much he weighs with that beard. By putting him in the post, he often gets switched onto these big men who can't really back down players the way you used to in the 90s. So you have to make quick decisions in the post, and that forces them against James Harden, who has some of the quickest hands in the league. And so he is, second in deflections. He gets a bunch of steals, and according to Synergy, he's actually one of the best post defenders in the game. He's allowing 37% from the field when he's the defender in the post. Yeah. That's crazy.
And so in addition to Harden, you also have all these guys who are basically built like fire plugs.
Right.
You have fellow thick boys surrounding James Harden. And so they could pretty much just switch off on each other. It doesn't matter who they get matched up against. And now they struggled early on in the season, but this second half, they've been really good on defense. And that's a big part of it.
Let's put this all in perspective. Okay, so James Harden is now one of the most devastating offensive, individual offensive players ever. And he also now plays defense like Karl Malone.
It's pretty good.
That's pretty freaking good.
Pretty good. All right, now we're going to talk about how the Rockets have done against the Warriors last year, how they've done against them this season, and perhaps what their Achilles heel is going into a potential playoff matchup. Last year, obviously, we all know how it went. 2-1 against the Warriors during the regular season, took them to 7 games in the Western Conference Finals. Unfortunately, the second half of the series didn't go as well as the first half of that series. Up 3-2 with home court advantage, but in that game 5, they lost Chris Paul. Pretty big deal.
Terrible.
They pretty much had the golden opportunity in game 6. I think they were up 17, but Klay Thompson pretty much just stormed back. In the midst of that, James Harden seemed like he was running out of steam, although if you asked him, he was pretty terse about it. I feel like he probably had enough of that over his career at this point where
no one's going to actively admit that, you know?
Right, but seemed to it, and it caught up to him, I think. Again, in that game 7, up 11 at half, again, big lead. They were controlling the boards, which is a weird thing because they often went small, and the Warriors theoretically had the size advantage. But a team that broke a record for three-pointers made in the regular season, missed 27 straight.
How the hell do you do that?
For a team practically built on the Pythagorean theorem, the math really just
that totally makes sense. I think that's good. Yeah,
I took algebra twice, so that's cool.
So did I.
Really?
Yeah.
That's surprising. But James Harden in that game, 12 for 29. It did seem like while he was productive, I think he had 32 in both games, it seemed like he wasn't the same player in those two when he didn't have Paul to kind of take the sort of reps that he used to getting. But at the end of the day, still the only team in the Kevin Durant era to take the Warriors to 7 games. This season's kind of been more of a mixed bag.
Yeah, so this season we're looking at maybe 4 different iterations kind of jam-packed into one single confusing season. They started off, they started off disappointing. Kevin O'Connor wrote a piece about how they're in danger of missing the playoffs, and thank God that the Ringer curse exists, right? Because now they're right back into it. But if you combine their record from this season and from last, including the playoffs, the Rockets still have a winning record over the Warriors.
Yeah.
They're 3-1 this season in the regular season. They were 2-1 in the regular season last year. They lost 4-3. That's still pretty good. And we're looking at a team that still has the horses to do it. It's just, the evidence that we have in each of these games is all fragmented.
Right.
We're not really getting a full view of what this team is right now. The first game that they played, it was November 15th. The Rockets basically destroyed the Warriors with math. They hit 16 threes. Granted, they shot 47 times to get there, but for some reason, it was a game that was a Freaky Friday type of situation with the Warriors where they hit 4 of 18 from 3. Not a single starter hit a 3.
Right, and to your point about things kind of changing on the fly here, James Ennis, I believe, started that
He was
game,
a huge player in that game.
and now he's with the Philadelphia 76ers,
Right.
just to show you how things are changing over time.
The second game, January 3rd, it was the game of all games. It was James Harden's MVP moment. It was James Harden's probably best shot of his career. The game winner over 2 Warriors defenders in overtime in Oracle Arena. Guess who was playing in that game? Brandon Knight. We're looking at a team that just, it has all its right pieces right now, but what does that look like in the future? I have no idea.
Right, and in that third game, James Harden didn't play. Chris Paul kind of took over. They won somehow. And then in that last one, Kevin Durant didn't play, so it became the boogie show. So there's a lot of things kind of moving around. This Rockets team has been fluid, essentially.
It kind of feels like these two teams know that they're going to face each other, and they're just kind of dancing around each other.
I like that. Their Achilles heel, I would say, is just some of the size they have in the wings. Because in particular, it did seem like the Warriors signed DeMarcus Cousins in order to potentially have that sort of skeleton key sort of guy, that kind of curveball they could throw at him. Cousins had been really successful against the Rockets in the past. He actually tore his Achilles in one of his best performances with the Pelicans against the Houston Rockets. And so
Funny how things work.
And the Rockets, in the midst of changing things up, they lost Trevor Ariza in the offseason. They didn't want to pay him because of potentially luxury tax concerns. Luke Richard-Mbah-a-Moute, who was big for the Rockets last year in the regular season. That's another like wing type that they really relied on.
Right.
They pretty much had to fill them all with guys on the fly, as we talked about, those gaggle of wings. They're basically trading off the things that they know they had in Trevor Ariza, a guy who had been in that system for a very long time, to a bunch of dice rolls. And you do wonder what they're sacrificing there in a playoff series in particular. So in addition to championship rings, Danny also brought a play with him in order to break down and show us what the Rockets have kind of done, specifically against the Warriors, that might work in a playoff series.
Yeah, I think everything that I've said about the Rockets' offense kind of actually goes in reverse for their defense. So their defense, because there's so much switching going on, it actually is a lot more democratic. So what they're doing on offense is, obviously my turn, your turn, but with their defense, everything kind of comes together. And so one of the early, I remember this play right when it happened in January. I was watching it. The play starts with Kevin Durant on the wing, Clint Capella's guarding him right out at the 3-point line. Kevin Durant drives in, Klay Thompson makes a cut that opens up Draymond. Now, the problem with this is the Rockets have so many interchangeable defenders who can basically just clog up the lane. And by the time Draymond cuts down the lane for this open pass from Durant, the Rockets have kind of sucked up all of the space down in the paint, and Daniel House dislodges the ball.
Yeah.
And it's just a group gang defense.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing because last year, I think one of the big takeaways was just that the Warriors don't have as many shooters as you'd think. They have 3 of the best shooters of all time, but after that, it gets really dicey. They were throwing in guys like Nick Young, and sometimes he would get hot and it would work, but sometimes they wouldn't. Quinn Cook got in the mix there when Andre Iguodala went down. He's not a shooter, but it definitely brought them more into their depth. And Draymond Green has been terrible. He's just almost unplayable. If he wasn't so good on defense and just orchestrating whatever, they wouldn't play him as often.
And that's kind of the thing, the entire idea of the lineup of death with the Warriors was just that they were able to have 5 shooters on the floor at the same time, because Draymond at that point was shooting, around league average from 3.
Yeah.
Now he's nowhere close.
No.
And now, you're playing him at the 4 or him at the 3, technically, or Durant's at the 3, but you also have to play Kevon Looney, who is absolutely not a shooter.
Yeah.
And so now with the Warriors, you're basically having 2 non-shooters on the floor at all times, for the most part.
Yeah, it just makes it a lot easier.
Right.
You can throw in a guy like Daniel House.
Yeah.
And even if he isn't shooting well.
Yeah.
And that's basically what Ariza did last year. He wasn't shooting well, but he had so much defensive value that they kept him on the floor. Every pretty important lineup that they had Trevor Ariza in it.
But when you can hide, a defender on a non-shooter, it allows them to freelance. It allows, PJ Tucker to take on more of a role and basically show off his own individual defensive playmaking.
Yeah.
By the end of it, it's a dunk from Capella.
That's our guy. All right, we call this last segment Warriors. It's our Warriors scale. It's pretty much how worried the Warriors should be. Danny, on a scale from, let's say, 1 to 10, 10 being the most worried about the Houston Rockets, how worried should the Warriors be?
I think the Rockets have become a top 3 team in the NBA. Post All-Star break, they're a top 2 defense, which is basically back to where they wanted to be last year. I think they're back very close to where they were. 7.5?
7.5, wow. I was gonna say 8, and I thought I was being really bold. I feel like as we were going through the research, I'm like, man, this team's really good.
Yeah.
And they're just not that much worse than last year. The early results didn't come about, but pretty much they've acquitted themselves. They're the hottest team in the NBA right now. I do wonder how much that's going to carry over. If they get into the wrong matchup, everything in the West is kind of fluctuating, so maybe they get into a long series. That will play into it. Harden fatigue comes in. But I would say in a 7-game series, they stand a better chance than pretty much any team in history that the Warriors have had to face in the KD era.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
That's fair.
So you have to be worried Warriors. All right, that's it for this time for Dethroning the Warriors. That's Danny. I'm Justin. Subscribe to the feed. Do the other things that they're gonna tell me to do.
Smash the subscribe button.
And yeah, do that. We will see you next time.